Do you guys ever wake up and just start thinking about how awesome breaststroke is? Just me? Let's talk about breaststroke.
Breaststroke has basically lasted forever, but it traces its Olympic roots to the start of the 20th century when you had swimmers doing some pretty different things from how they are today. As a matter of fact, until 1952, swimmers were allowed to take butterfly strokes as recovery between their strokes. So you would have a swimmer in one lane who would be basically doing butterfly with a breaststroke kick next to a swimmer just doing what looks fairly close to modern day breaststroke. But in 1952, that overwater recovery basically just split off, and now you had butterfly as one distinct event and breaststroke as another. Alas. The 100 breaststroke doesn't actually become an official Olympic event until 1968, which might seem crazy now, but yeah, we had half a century of 200 breaststroke before the 100 breaststroke existed at the Olympics. That coincided with one major rules change in breaststroke too, in which you were not allowed to pull past your hip line anymore. So now you only saw one pull that would go down all the way to the hips, and that has stayed to today, where we have the underwater pullout starting every breaststroke race. But one thing you did see throughout that time period that's different from today is that everybody was swimming with their heads up because they had to, and not just on the breath. Back then, a few decades ago, you had to keep your head at or above the surface of the water throughout the whole stroke. So there was no period of getting a breath and then getting the head down. There was always at least a little bit of your head that had to break the surface until 1987. So 1987 rolls around, and now breaststrokers are allowed by rule to get their heads down every stroke. So now breaststrokers are basically swimming the modern day version of breaststroke, where they are getting their breath and then getting their heads all the way down into a basically streamlined position every stroke. So now the pendulum has totally swung the other way with the stroke, where before it was much choppier with the head staying still and up the whole time with a really high stroke rate, and now you have swimmers that are trying to really use the glide as effectively and efficiently as they possibly can. And that has evolved a little bit more as time has gone on, but that's basically now modern day breaststroke.
And it's pretty cool. I remember when I was a swimmer, my club coach at the time told us that breaststroke was the stroke that was still changing the most. I thought that was really neat. It's still evolving as time goes on, and really quite quickly. Coach Misty and Coach Mike are going to talk about it a lot this week, what really good modern breaststroke looks like. But that's what's neat. It could be different 5-10 years from now.
Except that we haven't covered one super important thing, and we're going to have to go back in time a little bit to talk some more about the underwater pullout. When the rule change came about in the mid-60s that you could no longer pull down to your hips every stroke, that basically made the underwater pullout a thing because you were still allowed to do it on your first stroke off the start and off every turn. And that has lasted all the way through to today, with two big rule changes in the meantime. Leading up to 2005, you were not allowed to take a dolphin kick at all during the pullout. No leg movement as you were throwing down, but that didn't stop a lot of swimmers from still trying to do it. Even at the highest levels of swimming, you had people sneaking in dolphin kicks and getting away with it. So in 2005, across the board, it was established that you could take a dolphin kick now during your underwater pullout, but you had to let go of your streamline first. So swimmers did that all the way up until 2014, where we're getting into modern day territory, and they updated the rule so that you could take that dolphin kick whenever. And so that, combined with all the other rule changes, gets us to modern day breaststroke.
So what this means is, if we look back a few decades, breaststroke at the highest levels of swimming looks very different from how it looks today. And it's pretty crazy that in such a short amount of time the stroke has evolved so much, but a lot of it goes in line with just how swimming trends in general have changed. A lot more focus on getting the head down, being in a really good streamlined position every stroke means that we're swimming more efficiently now and having to rely less on power. But that being said, as training has improved over the years, power has also increased. And so we still see some of the lessons from a few decades ago being applied today in some interesting ways.
One last thing to note. Realize that all of these changes really came about because in the first place, swimmers were willing to experiment and try new things with their technique just to improve themselves and be faster in the water. So try and do that yourself. When we get back into the water, play around with your stroke. Maybe a higher tempo breaststroke is what you're suited for, or maybe you should work on lengthening out your glide a little bit. Just don't be afraid to see what works best for you individually and go from there.